Last year, in 2025, I tried to live like it was 10 years ago. Listened to the most important album lists of that year, as they reached the 10th anniversary, saw some of the most important films of the era, saw a new girl in its entirety, and even bought a refurbished 2015 MacBook Pro to really feel like it was 2015. I did this little experiment partly to fully experience art from that era in the context of its own time, to maximize my immersion in my consumption in some way. But maybe what I was truly, deeply trying to achieve was some form of escape. Being a young adult in 2025 felt to me like a very bleak experience. I was watching more and more extremist political ideas rise all around the world, the economy making it harder and harder for young people like me to move out and live happy few lives, and most of all, the way too fast, never stopping, rise of generative AI. An industry that is slowly killing art, obfuscating all passion, eroding critical thinking, and fueling misinformation and hate online. I long for simpler times. I also thought of my older sister, who is around 10 years older than me, and felt slightly jealous that when she was my age, she didn't have to live without most of this. So I tried to build a kind of time machine to the art I consumed, and attempt to live the life she lived when she too was 22. That was a reference. Despite it all, I did not fully commit to living 10 years in the past. I still listen to new music, still watch new TV shows and movies, and the morningly recent cell phone. And of course, I still spend endless hours scrolling through Instagram and TikTok without hipsters and the keep calm messages of yesteryear. And in my endless scrolling between Labubu matches, 6-7, and performing emails. Yes, this is Matcha. Why do I ask? I felt a little relieved, as I saw other people my age echoing the same feeling of being cheated of an adulthood previous generations promised, but that never really came to be. Some expressed jealousy towards the millennial lifestyle, while others outright blame millennials and other generations for creating a world where us, Zoomers, simply cannot thrive. In this video, I want to dive into this phenomenon. So in this video, I want to dive into this yearning Gen Z has for the millennial lifestyle, while also looking back at media popular at the time that has surfaced as a consequence of this yearning, of social media's change between generations, and the millennial optimism that is missing in Gen Z. A few years ago, if you asked someone from Gen Z their opinion on millennial lifestyle and their culture, they would probably call it cringe or chuggy. But it seems that over the years, Gen Z seems to have turned a lift on their perception of millennial life. With the rise of a new to be cringe is to be free mindset, they stopped looking down on pumpkin spice lattes, skinny jeans, and finger mustaches, and instead began envying the young adult life of the early to mid 2010s, wishing they had lived it themselves. On the internet now, you see young people saying things like, "I would have been a great millennial. I would work at ID, and my friends would work at Vice and BuzzFeed News. And write listicles, and Twitter was at its prime. Unfortunately, I was too busy being in 6th grade to participate." And also, imagine, it's 2013, a new episode of Girls is dropped, you're a millennial woman living in Greenpoint, trying to make it as a slam poet, and you're dating a man who makes BuzzFeed quizzes. Life is good. And if you open the comments, no smartphone, just a new girl-inspired outfit, and an iPod loaded with passion pit. My dream job was to make BuzzFeed quizzes. The future felt so bright. Gen Z will never know the kind of optimism we felt. Gen Z learned to grows that their millennial hate was always rooted in jealousy. So why do young people in the early 20s feel this way now? In some way, every generation has felt a little bit jealous of the one who came before it. But is this just a typical cyclical envy, or is there something more going on here? In October last year, David Robbins, a Gen Z behavioral expert and a media analyst at Birdie, published an article on how Gen Z compares itself to other generations, and found that most of them feel they were born in the wrong generation, 60% in fact, and that around 46% envy millennials. So why is it that almost half of those surveyed felt jealous of the previous generation? The main reason stated for this feeling was that millennials were the last generation to have a chance at a normal life in a normal world, with the rise of AI being cited as the second most prominent reason as to why they felt jealous. And it makes sense. Gen Z had to deal with a global pandemic that we never truly came back from. Instead, we created a new normal. A new abnormal, some folks from New York would say. Don't go there, cause I'll never return. Right after this widespread global disaster, we changed jobs, our relationship with others, and our outlook on the world, AI started advancing at a very scary pace. And with each year that passes, it becomes an ever more dangerous and menacing presence, from jobs being taken by AI to little crimes being created and easily disseminated with no stop in sight. Overall, the state of the world right now is scary to anyone living it. And Gen Z had to deal with all of this straight out of high school and straight to hell on earth. One thing that could either be a cause or a symptom of this recent nostalgia is the surfacing of media that was popular during the twilight of the millennial years, which is now being reappreciated and revived by younger generations. New Girl, for example, a show about a girl named Jess, played by twee hipster icon Zoe Deschanel, living in an often overcrowded loft, has enjoyed a significant resurgence after it ended. People today are falling in love with the lives of these 30-year-olds living in LA as they explore careers, love, and friendship. The show, that went from 2011 to 2018, offers a great depiction of what it is to be an adult during the 2010s. And many people now romanticize that life, wishing they could live in a loft without their friends in some big city, acquainted Taylor Swift, and, spoilers, you've been warned, having a friends to lovers romance that is on and off again until it finally beautifully eclipses to the sound of green light ballad. One can only dream. But perhaps the show that has ushered the most desire to live your adult life in different times is HBO's Girls, starring Lena Dunham, which is often considered the show that defined the millennial generation, especially, well, girls. Girls is an HBO show that went from 2012 to 2017 and centers around a group of 4 friends as they navigate their post-college life in the Big Apple. However, unlike another popular HBO show centered around 4 women in NYC, Sex and the City, where we are presented with an aspiration and glamorous life, one where you are already successful and somewhat financially stable, Girls offers a more honest representation of life in the city in the 2010s, as well as what it felt like at the time to try and carve out a life in your early to mid-20s. As Morgan Wessling writes in a Substack, watching Anna, Mani, Jessa, and Shoshana stumble their way through post-college life is both entertaining and eerily familiar. The struggles, the financial instability, the career confusion, the toxic relationships, the shifting friendships felt so real. Girls lives in the in-between years where nothing feels settled and every decision feels monumental. The show perfectly masters the ridiculousness and relatability of this phase of life. It encapsulates the desperate need many of us have at that age to prove ourselves as we balance ambition with self-doubt. The characters are not an idealized version of what we want to be, but rather act as an ugly mirror of ourselves and our deepest flaws. The specific facet of the show led to many of its criticism at the time, as many viewers found the main characters to be deeply flawed and overall not very good people. Looking back and watching the show now, however, people are often met with the realization that while yes, the titular girls were not very good people or even good friends, but do they not represent some part of who we were at that very same age, as we made mistakes over and over again, not necessarily learning from them always. During the time it aired, everyone seemed to have an opinion on the show, even James Franco. Opinions which were often framed as demeaning and pseudo-intellectual takes on how girls failed to represent the real postgraduate experience. But today, removed from the internet pressure to write the show off as simply bad people doing bad things, many viewers agree that they see parts of themselves in Anna, Marnie, Jessa, or Shoshana. From 2023 to now, the show has surfaced in popularity and has been re-evaluated as one of the most important series of the 2010s. Thousands of rewatch podcasts and video essays discussing how misunderstood girls have become the norm. While this revival was initially driven by nostalgic millennials, now in their 30s, who live in a time when their futures felt more uncertain, this renewed acclaim has since reached Gen Z, now entering their own early 20s. Many are watching the show for the first time, almost 10 years after it ended in 2017, and asking themselves reflected in the series, the good, the bad, and the ugly. A 2023 article by Vice examined this very phenomenon among Gen Z adults watching the show for the first time, to their own generational lens, with some even arguing the show resonates more with Gen Z in some ways. Take Evan, 24-year-old living in New York, that when asked about Lena Dunham's character, who Vice coined as a poster child for the annoying millennial, said, "She really is the voice of a generation. Maybe not for millennials, but definitely Gen Z. I think Girls is more popular now because people are getting more annoying. I hate to say it, but as a generation, we're more annoying than millennials, because we're self-aware, but we continue to act the way we do." When asked about another character, Shoshana, I find shelter in so many of her mannerisms, and it's nice to see someone similar to me on TV. Someone who talks weird and fast, and also has the most insane opinions ever. She's honestly so Gen Z. Generally, I agree with the sentiments behind these newer readings of the show. Gen Z is famous for its self-awareness, and is often criticized for it. Despite this awareness, we still make many of the same mistakes millennials did at our age. And the self-awareness, paired with a nonchalant, often sarcastic attitude towards ourselves and others, can be perceived as annoying by other generations, and even our own. This outlook on life places young people today not too far away from the flawed characters of HBO's Girls, and where millennials often shied away from admitting they're related to the show out of fear of judgment, whether from others or themselves. Gen Z tends to be more open and honest about the fact that we might not be very good people sometimes. This openness makes the show deeply relatable to Gen Z, despite depicting a different generation altogether. Even though the characters may feel more relatable to us now, this distance in time creates a strange sense of being lost in translation. Watching Girls as someone from Gen Z can feel like observing a version of adulthood that, although still relatable, was meant for someone else. It can feel like we're supposed to be millennials, flawed 20-somethings living in the Big Apple, aspiring to be writers, and trying to make something of ourselves. Young adults today too feel like the voice of the generation, or at least a voice of a generation. But instead of expressing these feelings through early Facebook and peak Tumblr, the social medias we have today are scarcely different from what HBO's Girls and its audience adds, and so is its digital environment. Circling back to that EduBirdie article, another big reason as to why Gen Z feels envious of millennials is that they aren't afraid to be cringe. Generation Z spent most of their lives afraid of judgments and filled with anxiety. We're part of what came to be known cringe culture, making fun of everyone and everything, whether it be embarrassing dances or simply people being passionate about something. Men were booed off the internet for admitting they genuinely liked something that is now aligned with a 14-year-old's concept of what is acceptable, cool, or based. Millennials were one of the many groups caught up in this cringe policing. Everything they liked, from Harry Potter to Disney adults, and even the way they acted, was deemed cringe by Gen Z. This created an entire generational battle, with Generation Z even creating a new world for the specific type of cringe millennials supposedly emanated. Shugi. This might be because, while millennials grew up in a time when the internet was still in its infancy, unregulated but far less curated by algorithms, Gen Z grew into adolescence in a world where it was inconceivable not to be online. But the internet Gen Z spent 13 years on is very different from the one millennials knew. It feels less like a place to share your interests, it's a community of like-minded people, and more like a dystopian society, based on likes, algorithms, and popularity by any means necessary. Everyone is an influencer, everyone has their 15 minutes of fame, and everyone has their fall-off, publicly and permanently documented on the internet. Social media nowadays is one of the leading causes of anxiety and depression among teenagers and young adults, for a reason. Well, back then, it was a place to see what your friends were up to, whether it be grainy photos of food or fun times with fun friends, #yellow. Nowadays, you rarely see posts from people you know. They stopped being the main focus of social media a long time ago. Instead, we are bombarded with perfect lives of perfect people who somehow achieve every significant milestone by the age of 16, make millions daily, and are now selling products and courses, so you too just might have a chance at not being a miserable failure in life. But just a tiny little bit. Don't be the Lulu. As Eleanor Bernard writes for The Guardian, millennials grew up quite literally alongside the internet, complete with awkward faces, while Zoomers have never known a world devoid of near-constant and hyper-polished social monitoring. The digital landscape, once ruled by millennials, was awesome. Think back to those days when Photoshop edits of cats in space, auto-tuned news reports, and chaotically creative 7-second vines were commonplace. Meanwhile, Zoomers inherited AI slop, fascist influencers, and megalomaniac tech overlords, will also play a hand in global politics. How is that fair? And well, yes, there's an argument to be made that social media was always designed toward our self-image and sense of self-worth. Even millennials compared themselves to their friends back then. Today, however, this effect is amplified to an extreme. People now actively curate the perception others have of them to what they post on Instagram, which in turn creates feelings of underachievement in their followers and friends. Those people then try to curate only the best and most flattering parts of their own lives, continuing the cycle. This creates an endless loop of jealousy and anxiety built on depictions that are extremely curated and not at all representative of real life. With all of this, Gen Z is not really allowed to be themselves, out of fear of going against the grain and entering a so-called flop era. Millennials, however, share their most embarrassing parts online and simply live with it. They were happy. They were free. A feeling Zoomers often don't feel they can achieve now, especially when tech CEOs prove time and time again that they do not care about you. In fact, they profit directly from your anxiety, because that is exactly how their systems are designed to work. Nowadays, however, cringe culture seems to, thankfully, be on its way out. We now live in what feels like a post-cringe internet. As the world was so overused, it lost all its meaning. And we have come to realize that many of it was just poor billing. In its place, we have adopted a new to be cringe free attitude in recent years, and with it, a reassessment of what some of the millennial culture we once deemed as shugi. Even though some aspects are still viewed with disdain among Gen Z, such as Harry Potter obsession and the Jim Carrey-esque facial expressions they used to try and be funny, other parts, such as hipsters and twee, are now being seen as actually cool after all. Pumpkin spice lattes are being tasted again, and the fashion of the time is once again being admired in some corners of TikTok. Well, most of it. But perhaps this type of swagless bravado is the only attitude we have to this hellscape we find ourselves in. To be cringe is to be free. Live, laugh, love. With all of this, one specific aspect of the millennial era has become especially popular on the internet, and the more reason for us Zoomers to feel jealous of what we could have had, and that is the relentless millennial optimism of the early 2010s.
We are young. There's a fire in our soul. We go big or go home together.
Early in 2025, comedian and musician Kyle Gordon released a comedy song meant to parody the overblown optimism millennials had about their future in the early 2010s. With a sound reminiscent of the stomp clap music of that era, Think to Lumineers and My Friend's Sons, the song, aptly titled We'll Never Die, and of course, starting with We Are Young, quickly became a viral hit on TikTok, and then on the internet at large. The popularity of the song ensued discourse over this phenomenon, the so-called Millennial Optimism. But as people, especially Gen Z, started digging more and more into the strange happening, they began to yearn for that exact feeling millennials somehow had despite everything, as our generation nowadays is much more cynical. But what is Millennial Optimism? Well, post-2008 economic recession, Obama was in his first term, technology was advancing at a pace like never before, along with a bunch of new and exciting startups. For the first time in a long time, being alive felt hopeful for people in their 20s. It didn't matter that you had a bunch of student debt, or that you still had no idea what to do after your bachelor's degree. There was this whimsy of possibility, and all you could feel was a big, hopeful confidence in a very bright future, even if, deep down, you knew it was all delusional happiness. At its core, Millennial Optimism boils down to that very delusion, being joyful without a pinch of irony. Confronting the world, I'm only with your DIY crafts and a Pinterest mood board, filled with inspirational quotes. Everyone felt like the main character of a coming-of-age movie. The music was great and optimistic to a fault. Everyone had their favorite way too passionately cover, people had their Arab messy buns, and they were always at overpriced coffee shops, being served coffee by a barista with a man bun, or a blue-haired girl with a nose piercing and a Deathly Hallows tattoo. Life was simple. Life was good. Indie music especially. Now that Obama-era indie music felt extremely euphoric and cinematic, making the perfect soundtrack for your journeys to public transport, to your first job, or house parties with your friends, in a loft where everybody is sitting way too close to one another in the only couch you have. This magical world of delusional happiness in young adults seemed to entice Gen Z more than anything. As nostalgia for Y2K faded, it was replaced by this era of what felt like endless possibility and confidence. The first half of the last decade started to seem almost magical. It quickly became the main focus of Gen Z's nostalgia. As young people mourn the future they wish they could have had, while catching glimpses of it through TikTok edits. Gen Zers had this desire instilled in them to want to live in open studio apartments, work in brick-layered, cozy offices, and get a degree in writing or the arts, just like their older siblings, the millennials, had at their age. But with arts being looked down upon in education, AI taking entry-level jobs, and rent being so high that the studio apartments, considered cheap 10 years ago, are now a luxury, young people are starting to feel disillusioned by the millennial optimism idea. In fact, our generation seems to feel the exact opposite. We've come to be known for our feelings of doom. We were told since childhood that our world might become uninhabitable within our lifetime due to climate change. We became the first generation to fully grow up alongside the internet. And if that wasn't enough, we went through a little global pandemic while most of us were finishing high school or in college, or trying, at least, to join the workforce. Instead of convincing ourselves that there was still hope, all we could do was accept the cruel world as it was, knowing deep down that we would probably never realistically achieve many of the basic milestones previous generation reached and told us to strive for. Job security, financial stability, buying a house? Sure, Jan. Because of that, we are more prone to accepting end-of-the-world ideation and feelings of doom. It becomes difficult to imagine a future where we actually thrive, with the world in the state that it is. So we doom spend our way into temporary happiness and slowly become desensitized as we doom scroll our way into oblivion. In that doom scrolling, we end up living vicariously to fantasies of years gone by, probably as a form of escape, experiencing all types of nostalgia for times we never lived or were too young to fully experience. As is the case with the Millennial Optimism era. Some millennials join in on this nostalgia-driven, somewhat scholarly look back on their young adult years, even expressing sadness that young people today will never know what it felt like to be a young adult during the awful years of 2010 to 2016, and to feel inexplicably confident about the state of it all. As Chelsea Fagan of the Financial Diet says,
I always love it when Gen Z is romanticizing being a millennial in the early 2010s, because let me tell you, I was living in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, when Girls was on TV, working a full-time job writing listicles. And I would walk from my apartment to my open space office full of other millennials with the exposed brick walls and the industrial lighting. And on the way, I would pass by guys in skinny jeans with little mustaches, riding fixie bikes and playing Sleepyhead by Passion Pit. And I hate to admit it because there was a lot that really sucked about that time in my life in particular, but also in the world. But yeah, there was something in the air. Like, we couldn't identify it at the time, but there was just such an ambient level of optimism about the future that we do not have anymore. And I really feel for Gen Z that they never got to enjoy that period of just collective delusion, because it was not long for this world, but it was great.
but that something in the air really exists and simply died when the pandemic wasn't never truly there. Nostalgia as a way of tricking us into thinking in the past was better than it actually was. So if it really is just a fantasy co-authored by Gen Z and millennials alike. Not all millennials partake in this rose-colored reassessment of their past, however. Faced with the discourse around millennial optimism, some roll their eyes and argue that Gen Z is only cherry-picking the good parts of that era, by focusing exclusively on the privileged young people who were lucky enough to carve out a sustainable life in big metropolitan areas, which, all in all, only represented a small fraction of youth at the time. Others said they were only optimistic because that was their only way of dealing with the chaos-filled, uncertain youth. As one user on TikTok says, "We are so depressed, both Millennial romantics. The music was great, but the lyrics were devastating. Millennial optimism is borderline an oxymoron. Nostalgia is a knife." This nostalgia also seems largely focused on young, often American people who had enough money and opportunity to live in cities like New York or Williamsburg. Like with most nostalgia, it seems underprivileged people are made to be unremembered by TikTok revisionists. Many were the people who had to take on multiple jobs to stay afloat, and that is if they were able to find one. As research shows, unemployment was around 10% in many places around the world during that time. In fact, the 2014 Pew Research Center report confirms that the grass wasn't that greener back in the day. As it states, millennials were the first generation in the modern era to have higher levels of student debt, poverty and unemployment, and lower levels of wealth and personal income. Not just that, a lot of political turmoil and financial uncertainty of the time are probably taken out in this sentiment Gen Z seems to have for the millennial years. Because, well, of course no one wants to remember things like the Iraq War, rising student debts, or the opioid epidemic. It's also because most of us were too young at the time to even understand all that political turmoil and financial uncertainty. You want to ask a 10-year-old to talk about the political and economic state of the world right now. I mean, in 2013. He was probably too busy playing Black Ops 2 while listening to Avicii or Bangarang by Skrillex. I mean, what makes it all the more ironic is the fact that the song used in most of these TikTok edits about the Millennial Optimism era, a song called Blood by the Middle East, is quite a sad song, as it deals in themes of loss and grief. Most wouldn't get that from the TikTok edits, however, as they don't feature any of the lyrics, opting instead to use the fun and merry part in the second half. In the context of the song, the joyful shout is a moment of catharsis, of finally being able to let go after all the hardships depicted in the song. The fact that Gen Z took the happiest part of the song, without its context or mention of all the struggle around it, to soundtrack their version of the millennial era is quite fitting, as it reflects their out-of-context view of that time. We all desire better times. Sometimes we want to find comfort in the past. Feelings of nostalgia are normal, and studies reveal that nostalgia is most present in our lives when we feel the most uncertain about our present, which is the feeling that I think we all can agree that is most prominent during our young adult life, as we try to survive in a world that has become more unstable and complex, and in some ways scarier as we've grown up. I tried to live in the past last year, hoping to feel less overwhelmed by this new, scary, unfamiliar world I found myself in at 22. And even though it was interesting to immerse myself in all the media of 1 year in some form of displaced chronological order, it didn't help me achieve the near impossible task of escaping the present. And it shouldn't have. The passing of time is inescapable and suffocating at times. But the best we can do is keep up with it, as it waits for no one. It's fun to look back sometimes. We can't let nostalgia trap us. The funny thing is that future generations will probably yearn for the life we Gen Z had, just like we do with the millennial era. Or I see a lot of people romanticizing 2019, even calling it our 80s. A few months ago, I even saw nostalgia edits for 2024, and I'm sure that in 2035, we will see a bunch of edits romanticizing Barbenheimer and wishing they could have had a bad summer. Last year, I tried to live like it was 10 years ago. This year, I will live in the now. I just realized I never introduced myself. I'm Bruno, hi, and I guess goodbye.